I'll start us off, okay? I have a question for Nate. Oh, wait, there's a gentleman in the back that has a question. Come forward. Come forward. There's a microphone right here. So my question is not going to get asked. I'll ask you later. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Hello. Nate, question for you. My name is Paul Winkler. I work at Education Minnesota, which is often known as the Teachers Union.
Thank you.
Woo woo. What do you think the role is of principals, superintendents, and the Teachers Union in creating a more supportive, higher morale place to work? Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. I mean, that would be a really long answer, right? So I'll truncate it, and then I'd love to speak more, like, as we stand around. I would say honestly, it sounds so maybe Pollyanna, but I wonder when I enter into a new district, for example, if the superintendent, the principals, and the unions are even having this conversation. I mean, literally, is it on their radar? There are so many times, for example, when a union's primary role is contract negotiations and then grievances. And those are two really important elements of a union, but they don't necessarily fulfill day-to-day relationships and work in a school. They don't necessarily even address kind of the conditions of employment. So I oftentimes challenge unions to think about the depth and the breadth of the work that they could be doing. For principals and superintendents, largely the same answer. I think there's a big difference between managing and leading. And I think being equipped to actually lead people and to affect people. I was just say from a kind of a glib hallmark sort of answer, there is nothing wrong with being a superintendent or a principal, and your desire is that when someone bumps into you 10 years after they retired or left, that they said, you were the best person I ever worked for. That's great. I don't know why you would aspire to anything but that. So yes, student test scores, and yes, a good budget and a well-run schedule and a safe building. Those are all absolutely essential pieces of the job. But so is I love working for you, and stating it in those kinds of terms of employment, I think, are really key.
Anyone else have a question? Want to come up? Interested? Okay, well, my question for you is, Nate, so what if an organization or a group wants to bring you in to speak? How do they go about that?
Well, you can go to www.eklundconsulting.com. But beyond that, I would say how I enter into organizations typically. I would say oftentimes I enter into an organization that recognizes that it needs change. So they've come to their own kind of awakening, and I really applaud that because it's not easy. I liken my work to like the check engine light on your car, and you put some duct tape over it for a while, but then at some point you have to bring it in, and then you go next door to get a coffee, and you're like, please, just be a fan belt, or just like something, and then I call, and I'm like, guess what? It's just a fan belt, and then maybe there's some really tactical things we can do, and then maybe you need a new transmission and 4 new tires and a carburetor and some detailing. And that's a real moment too. And so I think that's one piece of it. I also mentioned at the end of my talk that I really do want schools to own their competition. And so I think increasingly we also work with really high-performing organizations that want to broadcast that. We're really good to our people. We've worked really hard at it, and we've earned it, and you should come work for us. Unapologetically. And so I think working across the spectrum is important. I would just say to those of you in the audience, and to your question, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm pretty fired up about this work, and would love to. I love this stuff. It's really important. So yeah, come find me.
Wonderful. Do you have any questions for Nate, or do we have any questions for Alexei or for Daryl? Anybody? coming up. Sir?
I'd like to hear more about what you're thinking about elevating the teaching profession and doing away with some of that negative talk that teachers have about their own profession. Any thoughts from you?
Oh, I'll let you field that one.
Well, but okay, I'll go. But I want to hear, like, you're in it. I mean, I would just say that I think changing our even mindset of each other and of the profession itself is really important. The language that we use around it, we sometimes call it competing in misery, for example, that we talked about earlier, just this idea that kind of the martyr complex of education. And I think it's laudable in terms of dedication to young people, and it's laudable about helping a civil democracy be a civil democracy. But it's really short-sighted in terms of, I'm going to do this for the next 20 years of my life joyfully. And so I think even that some of this is really in our core as educators, and beginning to moderate some of those inclinations is really important. And being willing to say, we have a survey question, I avoid competing with my colleagues in negative ways. And sometimes that comes back really dark. And what they have found out is that the unwritten rules of working in this organization is like, you should be exhausted. You should be like worn down to the nub if you really believe in kids. And what a strange thing we're telling people, even subconsciously. So I would say in terms of that elevation, I think some of that's on us as educators, is like own that kind of narrative in which we work.
And I'll weigh in. So my topic today was mentoring, primarily with my relationship with Alexei. However, in my broader work, I do lots of work with schools, in schools on a weekly basis. I work around these questions. I work with principals. I work with teacher leaders, instructional coaches, district coaches. And so I'll briefly try to address your question. This year, just to give you an example, 2 teachers I've looked up to for the past 20 years, one a biology teacher, one an English teacher, both said to me, I cannot do this anymore. But you're the best. You know, the ones you've always looked up to. I mean, just, it's like Jesus saying I can't do it anymore. And not to be blasphemous, but I mean, but I can't do it. And when you start peeling away the layers, aside from just the emotions of midlife and juggling and all the things that you alluded to earlier, Nate, I would add, sometimes simple questions can uncover structures that are so unhealthy for the profession. Structure is the classic. The person with the most seniority gets to choose classes first in the department schedule. Those sorts. Sorry, not to rain on anyone's parade, but in terms of longevity and the collegiality, things like, inequitable expectations of different teachers, right? There's sort of a mantra in education in which the teachers who really excel are rewarded by getting more students, and you're so good with the difficult ones, right? And so they are rewarded by receiving additional responsibilities. Anyone? And the teachers who struggle, then they put them in places where they don't affect as many people, and so they're rewarded by their lives getting easier. So I could talk about lots and lots of implicit structures that lead to your question, but I'll finish by echoing Nate's thoughts, transforming the school culture, finding ways in which to empower teachers to empower students, as opposed to just the end of the production line being how we measure success, is certainly laudable.
At the top there.
I have a question for Pella. Would you describe for us any moment where you have learned something that has been really full of joy to learn? And it doesn't have to be from a teacher, right? But where you learned something that's brought you joy.
So, sorry, I was just asking my daughter if you're having a hard time thinking of moments of joy around learning, are there things that you can think of that take the joy out of learning at school? If we can start there, if that's easier.
Mostly being teased about things that are perfectly normal.
That was great. That was great. Yeah. I have a question for you, you gentlemen. So if you are on this guiding, mentoring road, and you're working with a young person, and you just feel like you're not getting through, but you also know you have to do the work. It's important. How do you stay the course? What do you do to stay encouraged when you have a mentee that is like, your head is hard, but also you're brilliant?
I think in my experience, I think about being in the classroom with young folks and, maybe trying to get them to write, do some creative writing or something. A lot of times I'll put up prompts, people respond to it. But there's always a couple that are just like, I'm out, like they're just not even trying. And it's a very intentional, I want you to know I'm out. I'm not doing this right now. And that's okay. And I think it's important to remember that it's really not like, it's not a superhero position, It's like you reach who you can reach, you do what you can do, and you might not be the one that's supposed to connect with that person, but maybe you know someone who is, And so I think from my experience, which is limited compared to some of the other people on this panel, like I've seen folks who, they froze up, they were refusing to put any words on the page. And I think they were expecting a fight. They were expecting me to come on, And it's never about that, It can never be about that power struggle or sometimes there's just something else going on. So I think the more I find where it's like just trying to show up, let them know that you care. Like, hey, you need some help with this? Do you want some ideas or whatever? Just let them know that you're available and that you do care and that you do see them. And if, a lot of times if they're ready, they'll let you know, because those same kids, maybe not today or tomorrow, but next week, those same kids will try, So sometimes I think don't expect the miracle to happen in the moment, but just let them know, I'm here, I do care about you, I see you, and that goes a really long way.
I'm giddy. I'm just curious, Alexei, if you could speak to what Nate was saying as you're thinking about entering this profession and hearing some of the job satisfaction and kind of peeling away teaching as a craft and an art from teaching as a job, and how are you making sense of this as you're about to start the last phase of your teacher education?
Well, yeah, no, it's cool. I mean, I like running into burning buildings all the time, so it's really not a thing. I used to be a firefighter. No, it is absolutely intimidating and overwhelming to think about going into that profession, because so many people that I know and respect, I see how they do. I see how they get burnt out quick. So I'll be lying if I said I wasn't nervous or worried about going into that world. But at the same time, again, all I can do is what I know now, and I've taken a step forward and the door opens, so I'm gonna enter that door, and I think the thing that I'm gonna try to remember or try to remind myself when I'm ready to give up or whatever is like just trying to remember that like I was that student that was totally checked out and didn't give a damn about school and my passion was not within those walls. And I remember how so many times our classrooms do not allow the whole student into the room, And so I think if I can do one thing, it would just be like, let me make sure that again, each student that comes in my classroom, they know I see them, their whole person, they are welcome in there, and that might be a drop in the bucket, but that's part of the change that I want to see and be a part of. So.
Can I just speak to you, but then to you and then to me? Burnout in any profession, no matter what you do, is not something that happens to you. There's no airborne burnout. You don't get it from touching something. Burnout is something that we are willing dance partners with. It is simply the clinical condition of caring for others so much that you stop caring for yourself. Period. It is clinical. On page 19 of my book, there's 3 constructs of burnout that we can constantly measure ourselves. So on the day that you're cynical about students and you don't think any of them have passion or any of them have gifts, you're burning out. So you have to adjust. On the day that you think that parents are all horrible and they're out to get you, you're burning out. On the day that you think you're no longer good at your job and you should just quit, you're burning out. These are things that we monitor and engage in all of our lives, no matter what we do for our profession. And so I think the language of burnout's really passive. I hope I don't burn out. I hope burnout never happens to me. Hope is a horrible strategy. It's a daily practice of remaining engaged in whatever it is that you're doing. And I think that's ugh.
I just want to make a comment about the whole teaching position. And I run a school that is 100% of my students are invisible children. They were invisible somewhere else. And I would say most of my staff were invisible when they spoke about these particular children, wherever they were. And when I have universities come in and they want to see my program, because I haven't had a fight in 7 years, or I had, what are these kids doing? It's a constant, the universities in Minnesota, they come and say, I couldn't refer you one teacher. We're not preparing them for this. So what are you preparing them for? I don't know who's in the audience. I don't even know. And I never met you before, but Metro State is probably the one who's producing the best teachers, right? Yeah. And they're urban teachers, and they produce teachers of color, and they're the least funded. None of the money that is going for teachers of color is going to them. So I think it's a combination of so be ready to be prepared for something that's not helpful. You just need that piece of paper. But I think it's not, that relationship coming to these things is preparing you for what is waiting for you. But it's not the actual program and the class, and they don't prepare you for staff meeting. They don't prepare you for the person who's born out right next to you and try to not get contagious. So I just don't think it's fair that we leave the colleges out all the time, because these kids pay a lot of money to get something that in 3 years they're like completely disengaged from. And they came in like this. They came in all with illusion and emotion, like they want to change the world. I was just at a private university, and out of 12 students, only 2 students knew what DACA was. 2 students. And they were going to be highly, prepared, whatever, ready to work in June. So I think it's not just the teacher, the people who choose teaching, but it's what are we paying, and the kind of preparation that we're getting is what ends up burning them out more. Thank you.
When I finished up the PhD program at the University of Minnesota 14 years ago, I was placed on the advisory board over their teacher education programs. When I went through their teacher licensure program, that scope and sequence of curriculum included a single 2-credit course called multicultural education. Okay, now that was 23 years ago, all right? So 14 years ago, when I served on that advisory board, change was in the air. Metropolitan State University's urban teacher program was funded by the state of Minnesota legislature, I want to say 18 years ago, to create primarily teachers who were equipped to be effective in urban schools and to increase the number of teachers of color. We currently, through all of our licensure programs, have roughly 50% students of color, Somali, Korean, Hispanic, more African American. And so now with that said, so we've been ahead of the curve, so thank you for those props. However, the University of Minnesota, other institutions, Hamlin, have certainly stepped up their scope and sequence. I'm seeing change in their curriculum, but we all know that the change in curriculum doesn't necessarily bring about a change in your discourse and the way in which you interpret the world. So I'll pause with that. So thank you. I am optimistic about change in Minnesota, but it's slow in many institutions.
Question for Daryl. Hi. So being a mentor takes time. And a lot of times you need a mentor because you can't, and this system's not set up for you to succeed. So how do you weigh for yourself spending time changing the system so fewer people need the mentor versus being a mentor because the system today isn't set up for the next person?
And I think your question echoes why I left the high school classroom and went back to understand structures, right? Because I'm sorry, the question is basically, that's a really cool story, awesome, great mentoring story. How do we change the structures so that mentors aren't needed, right? So for example, at Metropolitan State University and many districts, I have a history of speaking about the invisible influences of social class, which I can attest to, right? The normal ways in which an institution functions, especially if it's composed historically of primarily highly educated white middle-class people, right? And so even if they're well-meaning and intentional, that does not transform the discourse, it doesn't transform the air. So to your question, I work with faculty development at my own university. I partner with allies in the communities of color within the institution in order to improve accessibility for all. But then at the personal level, how I work time in is when my kids were growing up, once I met Alexei, I'm like, come on kids, who wants some quality fun time with dad? Me, we're going to see Crescent Moon at a hip hop show. And so I would just integrate sort of family dynamics, with some shows.
That's all we have time for today, but please make your rounds and meet these gentlemen. Ask them some questions before you leave. We want to thank you all for coming out. Please help us with these events by taking a few minutes to do your survey. If you check out your email, you should have a link to the survey. Also, if you're like, I've got my device, I think the link is behind me on the screen, so you could tap it and fill it out just then. Also, there are paper copies that you can fill out tonight before you leave. This data really does help us secure funding for future EDTalks and improve these EDTalks for you. And we do need your help. Again, we're planning the 2018-2019 season, so there'll be a more involved survey that'll come out mid-May, beginning of June. Check out that survey. Give us some feedback. What do you want to see on stage? What do you want to know more about? How can we empower you as you empower young minds? Thank you to Nate Eklund. Thank you, Alexei Casselle. Thank you so much to Daryl Parks. And you young lady, fellas, pretty. I hope you guys had a great time. And yeah, thank you very much. Oh, thank Ice House. Give them a round of applause. And we'd like to thank our community partners, Achieve Minneapolis, Citizen League, Indigo Education, and Pollen. And also, again, a special thanks to our presenters. And Pahua has something she'll say.
Again, thanks to everybody. Thanks, Nate, Alexei, Dr. Parks, Pela. What a surprise for you to join us on stage. And our host, Lene, thank you for joining us. My name is Pahua Hoffman. I'm the executive director of the Citizens League. I'm one of the partners that works with Achieve Minneapolis and Pollen and Indigo Education in bringing this program together. This is the last one of our season, so sad face. But the reason why I'm on stage tonight is that I want to give a special thank you to someone, Rachel Shields, up there. I want you to slowly make your way down. These events, you have to just believe me when I say that there are a million details in putting these events together. And Rachel will tell you that it's a team effort, but it's a lie. She does the lion's share of the work, and she is what keeps us organized. She is who communicates with the speakers to make sure that their PowerPoint is set up and it's ready to go, and she is up there manning it all the time. Today is her last EDTalks with us.
She's leaving Achieve Minneapolis to go work for CenterPoint Energy, and her last day with Achieve is tomorrow. And so I want to just thank her, and I want to thank you for your friendship, for your leadership, for your partnership. We're going to miss you. I'm going to miss you. This is nowhere close to the token that really is, that you deserve, but I just want to thank you over the, I think, 4 years we've worked together, and how much fun I've had, and I know I speak on behalf of the partners, that we couldn't have done this event series without you. So thank you.
Thank you.
And the next time we see you, we hope that you are a guest and not behind the projector or behind the registration table or at 4 o'clock getting us set up, but that you are a guest. So thank you to Rachel Shields, and thank you to everybody who came out tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, you guys.